Have you ever believed that if you just tried hard enough you'd finally be seen like everyone else? Lena, a young black woman working as a housemaid in a seaside mansion, never imagined that a single glance from the billionaire's son would pull her into a world so unfamiliar, so dazzling it made her forget where she came from. A party, an invitation, and a wrinkle down the back of her dress, just enough to remind her who she really was. But this time, she wasn't stepping in to be chosen. She was stepping in because she had chosen herself. Let's begin where she no longer waited for anyone else's gaze, only her own. The morning sea breeze in Monaco carried a kind of dampness that was hard to name. Not cold enough to shiver, not warm enough to comfort. Lena stood in front of the Beau Soleil Hotel, her palms slightly clammy as she clutched a worn brown folio. Her fingers, more familiar with gripping mop handles and wringing cloths, now felt strangely out of place wrapped around the slim leather strap. She had never entered this place as someone with an appointment, but today, for the first time, she did. Inside, the hotel lobby shimmered like a sealed glass box. Everything perfectly in place. Chandeliers, fresh flowers, a faint stream of classical music serving as a quiet testament to order. Outside, Lena stood still in her crisp white shirt and fitted brown trousers, inhaling deeply. No lipstick, no perfume, no final glance in the mirror before leaving home. Only her grandmother's drowsy, half-whispered words from the night before, slurred by cough syrup. "Don't let anyone teach you how to walk." Lena hadn't replied then, but now she was trying. Before the glass doors could fully rotate, a man approached. Security uniform pressed, tie cinched tight, smile polished to industry standard. But the look he gave her, sizing her from head to toe, landing squarely on her shoes, was unmistakable. The shoes weren't worn out, but they belonged to the kind you found in a discount bin at the corner store. "Excuse me, housekeeping uses the back entrance." The words weren't sharp. They didn't need to be. Lena looked up. 1 second. Not long, but long enough for him to realize his mistake. "I'm not housekeeping," she said, voice soft, firm enough not to deny, quiet enough not to beg. A flicker of embarrassment passed over his face. His hand reached up to adjust his tie. "Ah, apologies. Who are you here to see?" "Manager of the Kingsley estate. I have an appointment." She held out the neatly clipped paper. No tremble, no rush. His eyes scanned the bold type. A nod. Then the door opened. Not wide, just enough for one person to step through without turning sideways. Lena crossed the threshold as if stepping into a different kind of air. The white light from the crystal chandelier spilled onto the marble floor, turning each step into something strangely precise. She walked evenly. Not slow, not hurried. She could hear her shoes tapping the floor, not echoing like in the movies, just enough to remind her she was real. A female staffer brushed past her, arms full of documents without a glance. A woman in pearls sipped tea in the corner, her eyes flicking to Lena for a beat, then turning away, as if her gaze had brushed against something it wasn't supposed to touch. No one asked her to leave, but no one welcomed her either. To the left of the lobby stood a large, unframed mirror, square, stark, placed like a silent witness to all that elegance. Lena paused, not to admire herself, just out of reflex. The glass was clean, unwarped, brutally honest. In it, she looked smaller, not because she was less than anyone else, but because spaces like this were never built for people like her. Not this skin, not this hair, not this body that would never quite fit into a tailored suit. Still, she smoothed the left sleeve of her shirt, where the cuff had folded in from the sea breeze. A small gesture, but enough. A quiet confirmation that she would not apologize for being here. Not to stand out. Not to be seen. Just to arrive exactly as planned. Like anyone else. A soft chime echoed overhead. Elevator arriving at the left. Wing in 1 minute. She turned down the hallway. No need to ask directions. No need to look back. But after she was gone, the mirror remained. Still. Silent. Unmoving. And yet, it had just reflected something rare in that lobby. A person who crossed the threshold not needing to be welcomed, and not letting anyone stand in her way. When the hotel doors closed behind Lena, the sensation of being seen through her skin, her clothes, her very footsteps, seemed to fall away. But its echo lingered. She didn't tell anyone about it, didn't text a friend, didn't write it down. But in the way she stood in the elevator, spine straight, chin gently lifted, hand resting on the strap of her folio like it held something precious, everything was there. Not for anyone to notice, but for herself. She had walked in, she had passed through, and she hadn't been swallowed whole. That afternoon, the sun edged slowly down the far side of the Monaco shoreline, casting golden light through the slats of the kitchen blinds. The scent of burnt butter from breakfast still clung to the air, mingling with a half-played jazz tune drifting from the radio. Lena sat at a wooden chair beside the kitchen table, one leg slightly uneven, creaking gently with each shift, like the soft wheeze of someone aging quietly. She was reading a dog-eared book titled Sustainable Living, Interior Design. Not from the library. One she'd found in a box marked for donation by the estate owner. She'd kept it like a charm, a bit of luck. A square of her mother's old handkerchief served as the bookmark. She read slowly, not because it was difficult, but because she didn't want to skim past what might once have been someone's hidden dream. On the table lay a small notebook, a cheap pen with fading violet ink, and a sentence she'd just begun. If my mother were still alive, the thought hung there, unfinished. She set the pen down and leaned back, gaze resting somewhere between the page and the long wash of light pooling across the tiled floor. A faint noise came from the side door, not loud, not hurried. Lena didn't turn. This was her break, and no one usually noticed. But Julian Kingsley had returned. His business trip to Italy had run longer than expected, and now he stood in the doorway, leather valise in hand, suit jacket draped loosely over one arm. He didn't enter. Didn't speak. Just stood there. Paused in a moment he didn't quite understand. There was something about the way she sat. Alone in the warm hush of the kitchen, light spilling over her hair, hands gently folded, not from cold, but from thought. That made him stop. It wasn't because she was beautiful. It wasn't even curiosity. Exactly. It was the quiet, the kind that made you want to pause, the way you might in front of an unframed painting leaning against a wall, not yet hung but already complete. Julian had never seen anyone from the staff sit like that, read like that. The kitchen was usually a place people moved through, cooking, scrubbing, leaving behind oil and sighs. But Lena sat there as if it were a reading room, and everything around her had a soul. He nearly turned away, and then he heard her speak, a whisper, really, barely there, as if not meant for any ear but her own. If my mother were still alive. Julian froze, just for a breath. The words weren't meant for an audience, yet they entered him like a secret prayer overheard through a thin wall. He didn't see her face, just her back, her narrow shoulders, and the quiet hands resting on the open notebook. He turned and left. No one ever knew he'd stood there. A few minutes later, Lena looked up. She thought she'd heard something at the door, but the garden was still, wind and tree shadows the only motion. She closed the book gently, tucked in the page, and glanced toward the sunlight. The sentence, "If my mother were still alive," remained unfinished. But something small had shifted. Not inside her. Inside the man who passed through the kitchen hall that day and found himself unexpectedly stilled by the silence of someone carrying a dream in behalf of someone who could no longer hold it. Dinner was always Lena's favorite time of day, not for the food nor the murmur of television from the neighbor's house, but because it was the 1 hour she could set everything down. The hushed footsteps echoing through the Kingsley estate, the clipped words sharp enough to score the skin of her palms, pains that didn't bleed but lingered like a paper cut between two fingers, she could leave them behind for a while. She left the kitchen just before the sun dipped below the horizon. The same slant of golden light, the same worn stone path leading down to the cottage at the foot of the hill, where a rosemary bush leaned toward the sea breeze and the mint pots her grandmother loved had turned brittle after Lena forgot to water them last week. The door gave easily under her hand, still warm from the afternoon sun. Her grandmother sat propped against a stack of pillows, a pale blue scarf wrapped around her hair. The radio played softly beside her, a crackling station, still spinning jazz from the 1950s, like a memory no one could quite trace back to its beginning. "Siu." Lena smiled. She didn't need to ask if her grandmother had eaten. She already knew the answer. "You eat, darling. I'm not hungry." Always the same. In the tiny kitchen, a pot of white rice porridge, soaked since morning, waited for salt and a few slices of ginger. The boiled eggs were cooked just right. No runny yolks, still tender. She set the table simply. The worn wooden chopsticks, a single glass of water. They ate in silence. Each lost in her own thoughts but seated within the same soft stillness. Lena said nothing about the hotel or the mirror or the guard's eyes. She didn't mention Anna either. Anna was new. Blonde, pale as porcelain, every scrape a map of red. That morning, Lena had been on her knees wiping the hallway floor with a damp cloth when Anna passed by, coffee in hand, heels clicking against the tile. "You're lucky," Anna said, half laughing, half not expecting anyone to hear. With skin that dark, no one even sees the dirt. Lena had smiled. Not with her face, nothing moved, but with a reflex born of long practice. She replied, "Yeah, maybe," and lowered her head, kept wiping. Not because she wasn't angry, but because she'd learned. Now, standing at the sink, warm water running beneath her hands while a lull of saxophone spun through the air, Lena heard herself speak. "Dark skin hides the dirt." The words startled her, not in meaning, but in tone. Her voice didn't sound like her usual voice. It wasn't resigned, it wasn't broken. It was hard, cold, like metal that had been sharpened to the edge. Her grandmother was rinsing her hands in the little basin by the door. She didn't say anything, but her eyes met Lena's, just for a breath, and Lena knew. She'd heard. She understood. No need to ask. No need to console. No need for words. After dinner, Lena wiped down the table. Each water ring erased like invisible dust from her skin. But some words couldn't be wiped clean. They didn't cling to wood or flesh. They settled somewhere in the quiet between a careless joke and a soft ache behind the ribs. She sat beside her grandmother on the bed, reached for her hand, but at the last moment only touched the pillow. Her grandmother turned and smiled with a squint. "Do you need to leave early tomorrow?" "Probably," Lena replied, watching the last light draw the shape of a leaf on the far wall. "I need to deliver some documents. Might see some new faces." "They might forget your name," her grandmother said gently, "but they'll remember how you walk." Lena smiled, not because it was poetic, but because the voice, familiar, steady, the last voice that belonged to her in this world, still chose to believe in something kinder than the truth. Later that night, the wind slipped in through the window, lifting the corner of the handkerchief Lena always kept in her shirt pocket. She tucked it under her grandmother's pillow, part ritual, part tether. In the dark, she closed her eyes, her hand still resting lightly on the edge of the pillow, like she was holding on to herself, to the part that still made sense. And somewhere near her ear, the jazz continued, not to lull her to sleep, but to settle the air after a long day, a day when some words felt as light as breath and still echoed for a very, very long time. After that quiet dinner, Lena drifted into sleep with a strange sense of calm, part serenity, part the feeling that something was waiting for her just beyond a threshold she couldn't yet name. Outside her window, the street lamps along the workers' housing dimmed one by one, surrendering to the night that blanketed the coastal slope. In her small room, her grandmother's steady breathing merged with the soft crackle of jazz from the old radio, playing through the night like the exhale of dreams too tired to rise on their own. Meanwhile, in another world, not far by distance, but distant by gravity, a private gathering unfolded at the harbor, as it did every Friday night among Monaco's young elite. Champagne glasses were never empty. Trays of black grapes and brie rotated constantly, and the strings of overhead lights cast a warm sheen over the tanned skin of men too accustomed to running empires without ever signing their own paperwork. Julian Kingsley arrived 15 minutes late. His white linen shirt was carelessly unbuttoned at the collar, sleeves pushed to the elbows, salt still clinging faintly to his hair from the late afternoon sail. He tossed his Porsche keys onto the table with a practiced flick, smiled in that lazy, faultless way, his gaze carrying the weight of no one but himself. "Did you take a detour through Italy, or what?" Louis, his oldest friend, asked, whiskey glass halfway gone. Julian dropped into a chair without answering. He poured himself a glass of water, rested his elbows on the table like he needed help holding up his own weight. His eyes were sharp, still, but they had sunk a level deeper tonight. Not into thought exactly, but memory, bobbing in him like a boat loosely moored. "You still planning that yacht party?" Another voice chimed in, demanding and careless in the way money tends to be. "Last year's was a snooze. We need something with a twist." "A twist? Like what? Blind DJ? Shark Tank around the boat?" Someone laughed, half joking. Then Louis, a little drunk and squinting now, let something drop. Not meant to land heavy, but it did. "Go big, Julian. Invite your maid. Dress her up, put her on the boat, see how long it takes before someone figures it out." Laughter. Not cruel, exactly, but smug, self-satisfied, the kind that came from people who never had to wonder what it was like to be let in or left out. Julian didn't laugh. He raised his glass to his lips, took a slow sip, eyes drifting beyond Louis's shoulder to where the night sky met the still water, dark as ink, impossible to erase. A flicker crossed his mind. Lena sitting alone in the kitchen, a halo of light warming her hair, her hand resting on a book like she was holding a memory. That didn't belong to her. Her voice, low and half-whispered, "If my mother were still alive," still rang in him like a song that hadn't been allowed to play. He set his glass down and tilted his head toward Louis. "Not to test her," he said quietly. "To test you." For a moment, the table fell silent. Then someone laughed. Someone else whistled and glasses were raised again, cheering on what they took to be a clever dare in the making. But Julian didn't smile. This wasn't a game to him. There was no joke in his mind, no hidden cruelty. There was simply something about Lena, the way she carried stillness like armor, the way she moved through rooms that never meant to welcome her without asking for permission. That made him wonder. Could his world bear someone like her without breaking? Or would the cracks finally show? He pulled out his phone, typed slowly, paused, deleted, typed again. "Lena, I have a special invitation. If you're free this weekend, I'd like you to come to a yacht party. Not for work, just a different kind of experience. No explanation, no coaxing, no promises, just an invitation. Half test, half truth, and maybe the beginning of something he hadn't expected." He hit send. Across the city, in the little house at the bottom of the hill, Lena's phone lay quiet on the table beside her bed, the screen still dark. She was fast asleep, one hand curled around the soft blue handkerchief beneath her pillow. Outside, the first trace of dawn settled gently over the dried mint pots. Another morning was coming, but tonight was when everything began to shift quietly. The room lay bathed in the quiet glow of the bedside lamp, its light blurring against the white curtain fluttering gently in the breeze drifting through a window left slightly ajar. The radio murmured softly. No lyrics now, just the solitary voice of a piano, feeling its way through each note like it was searching for something inside the listener. Her grandmother slept peacefully, her back turned toward the spot where Lena usually sat reading in the evenings. That chair was empty now. Lena stood on the balcony, phone in hand, the screen's pale glow lighting her chin, her nose, the still focus of her eyes fixed on a message. Julian had sent it minutes ago. It wasn't long, it wasn't elaborate. No promises, no decoration, just an invitation, strange and open, filled with blank space between the lines. "I want to honor those who work with their hands. Join us. A real invitation, a real chance." She read it again, once, then twice, then again, too many times to count. Her fingers typed, "I'll come." She paused. The words on the screen felt more like something she was saying to herself. Hughes erased them. Not because they were wrong, but because she didn't yet believe she'd really said them. She typed again, "If this is a joke, please don't pull me into it," and paused again. Longer this time. As if those words had gathered all the years she'd been made into a punchline, not with slurs, but with soft comments, sideways glances, words that floated like silk but left torn skin. She deleted that too. Lena set the phone down on the windowsill. The screen stayed lit. The light wasn't hot, but it made her eyes sting, tired from too many quiet hours spent holding herself together. She leaned her forehead against the wooden frame and exhaled. The sound of her breath didn't feel like her own. The sky was starless. A thin band of cloud slid past a nearly full moon, its light hazy like a dream picked up by the wind before it could settle. From far below, the sea whispered its rhythm. Familiar, but tonight it seemed to pull something from deep inside her. She turned back into the room. Her grandmother coughed softly. Lena pulled the blanket higher, brushed her hand gently across, her shoulder in a silent ritual they both understood. "I'm here. You're safe." Then she stepped outside again. Not to stand this time, but to sit on the wooden floor of the balcony. Back against the wall, knees pulled in, arms wrapped tight, like she used to sit during long winters when her mother was still alive. The phone still glowed beside her feet. She didn't turn it off, didn't send anything else. Just sat there, in the space between an invitation and a reply she hadn't yet named. Thoughts flickered across her mind. Do I even have anything? To wear? What if I go and they see through me? What if she needs me here that day? What if I'm just the flavor in someone else's fun? But then, something quieter crept in. A thought not sharp, not certain, just enough to make her chest ache. What if this is the only time someone sees me as not invisible? A gust of wind swept the curtain outside, brushing her shoulder. She pulled it in, folded it neatly. A small, unconscious act, but one more note in the quiet symphony of a restless night. She didn't want to leave the world she knew. This room, her grandmother, the warm scent of old pages, the feel of cool tile underfoot, at dawn. But she also didn't want to stay locked in the dim places where people assumed she didn't shine bright enough to be seen. Almost 30 minutes later, Lena rose. She stepped inside, turned off the balcony light. Before climbing into bed, she looked at the phone once more. She didn't write anything. She just let it be. Tomorrow, maybe she would reply, or maybe she wouldn't. But tonight, for the first time in a very long while, she didn't fall asleep right away. Because something was stirring inside her, softly, like a seed buried deep that had just been brushed by a sudden and unexpected sliver of light. The morning after passed with an uncanny stillness, as if nothing had changed. But for Lena, everything had. She said nothing about the message, didn't touch her phone the moment she woke. She made breakfast as always, tended to her grandmother, did the laundry, wiped the floor where the first light of day spilled through the window. But every task moved half a beat slower, like each gesture needed space to breathe, like her hands were listening closely to her heart. By late afternoon, the sunlight stretched across the cement floor like a quiet ribbon of gold. Lena opened the drawer where her grandmother kept a small wooden box. She used to call it the box for days that haven't come yet. Inside were a faded photo, a broken necklace, some old receipts with the ink worn thin, and a pair of silver earrings. They had once belonged to Lena's mother. Simple circles, nothing ornate, but they had always shone like moonlight on the nights Lena stayed up late studying as a girl. She took them in her palm, studied them in silence before fastening them to her ears. Heavier than she remembered. Or maybe she was lighter now, having carried so much for so long. The sea blue satin dress lay across the bed, borrowed from a friend she used to work with in the kitchen, a friend who once said, "Keep it. You never know when you'll need it." Lena had never believed that day would come, and yet here she was, smoothing out the cool fabric with palms that had known only bleach, bucket handles, and cold stone floors. She dressed slowly, carefully, as if each fold of cloth was a step upward from a past that had never been gentle. No dramatic makeup, just a bit of lipstick. Her hand trembled slightly as she applied it, not from fear, but because it had been so long since she'd seen herself not as someone cleaning floors, hauling water, or standing guard over other people's dreams. The mirror reflected a slender Lena, but her gaze held steady. Not defiant, not seeking approval, simply certain. Tonight, she would walk into a space she once only passed through like a shadow. Her grandmother stirred with a soft cough. Lena stepped into the room, pulled the blanket higher, and pressed her lips to the woman's forehead. Her grandmother didn't open her eyes, but nodded faintly, like she'd always known this moment would come. "I'm only going for a while," Lena whispered, "and I'll come back, different." The door opened. Night air rushed in, tinged with salt and chill and something that felt like anticipation, though it wasn't quite fear. Lena stepped out, her dress swaying in the breeze, the earrings brushing her cheeks like an invisible hand reaching from the past. Down the road, to the harbor, warm light poured from doorways, flickered across rooftops. Her footsteps echoed softly, as if drawing a new path no one had walked before. She didn't know if people would laugh, or whisper, or turn their backs. But she knew this: she wasn't turning back. A taxi idled at the curb. Lena opened the door, stepped inside, never glancing at the rearview mirror. The reflection in the window caught her eyes, still the same ones that had stared into the hotel lobby mirror not long ago. But tonight, they didn't wait for doors to open, or directions to be given, or proof to be demanded. Offshore, the yacht lights glowed like stars too close to touch. Music drifted across the water, an invitation from another world. Julian was there, waiting. Maybe he didn't know what or who he was waiting for, but he couldn't have imagined that the woman he once saw in the hush of a kitchen evening would come walking toward him now, not to be chosen, but to choose herself. And have you ever stood before a door like Lena's? If you have, or if you're waiting for the moment when it's your turn to knock, hold on to that feeling. Because maybe, just maybe, the second you're reading this is the moment you're already standing before your own mirror. If you see part of yourself in Lena, take another step with her, and don't forget, tap follow, to stay with her on the journey ahead. One step, one story, one woman who chose not to stay silent, and a night waiting quietly, ready to be named. The night wind swept along the Monaco harbor, thick with salt, no longer sharp like it had been that afternoon, but rich, cool, as though the sea itself was preparing for a performance. The Kingsley yacht, L'Eclipse, was already docked, its white hull aglow under a web of precise lighting, gleaming like a stage adrift on the water. Lena stepped onto the deck in her sea-blue satin dress. Her hair was loosely pinned, two soft tendrils framing her temples. In her hand, she carried an old leather clutch borrowed from an old friend. No one knew her, no one asked. A few turned to look, then turned away again, eyes pausing just long enough to assess, then slipping back into champagne, conversation, and the well-rehearsed rituals of the upper class. Julian saw her the moment she arrived. She didn't look at him, didn't hurry, didn't search. She simply existed, exactly as she had the first time he saw her in that kitchen, a stillness inside the noise. He moved toward her, about to speak, but Lena spoke first. "Thank you for the invitation." One sentence, polite, distant. Then she turned and walked on. Julian stayed where he was, unsure if it was surprise or something deeper that kept him still. Lena passed the jazz trio, accepted a mocktail from a passing waiter. She didn't drink, and she didn't know what to say to anyone here. But the golden light touched her cheekbones in a way that made her glow. Not with makeup, but with something quieter, steadier, a calm that resisted being ignored. A middle-aged man, one of Kingsley's business partners, tilted his head toward her. "And you are? I don't believe we've met." Lena smiled. "I work in interiors. Recently assisted on a project at the Kingsley estate. Not a lie, but not the whole truth." The words passed like a gentle breeze, heard by some, dismissed by others. She didn't command attention, but she drew it anyway. Not with her dress, but with her presence. The kind of gaze people couldn't quite place and couldn't quite look away from. The evening flowed on. The jazz softened, deepened. Julian watched her from across the deck. She stood at the railing, eyes on the sea. He joined her there, shoulder to shoulder, neither of them speaking, just silence as steady as all the nights before. The kitchen hallway, the soft edges of a conversation that had never begun. And then it happened, a slip, a voice, a woman with blonde hair, a daughter of some real estate empire, red wine sloshing in her glass. She laughed, too loudly after a second glance at Lena. "Wait, I know her. You used to clean my floors in Florence, didn't you?" "Oh my God, Julian, did you actually invite the help?" The laughter wasn't loud, but it didn't have to be. Time pulled taut. The air stilled. Julian said nothing. Lena turned. No anger, no fear. Just a gaze, slow, steady, as if she were engraving this moment for herself, not them. She set her glass down. Gently. "Thank you for tonight," she said, not looking at anyone. "I think I'll be leaving now." Julian stepped forward, but his feet stayed rooted. Someone murmured beside him, "Let her go. Everyone's seen enough." Lena walked past him, the wind lifting the hem of her dress. She didn't cry, but her steps trembled, just slightly. Not from hurt, but because she hadn't fallen. Julian stayed silent. And that was the worst part. When Lena stepped off the boat, the sea wind struck harder. She paused at the dock, looked back once. The yacht still shimmered, music still played, as if nothing had happened. Only Lena, hand clenching her clutch tighter, shoulders back, eyes fixed on the narrow road. Leading home was different. Since that night on the yacht, Lena hadn't spoken a word about what had happened. Not to her grandmother, not to the friend who had lent her the dress, and certainly not to Julian. Life resumed as though the party had never taken place. Her work schedule remained unchanged. The estate kitchen still smelled of morning toast and evening dish soap. Only one thing was different. She no longer hummed along to the jazz as she cleaned the floors. Every step she took in the Kingsley estate after that felt like walking across shards of glass. Slow, careful, knowing there would be cuts, even if she didn't yet know where. She hadn't seen Julian, hadn't looked for him. But inside her, she knew. The distance between them had never been narrower, and never farther. That morning, the sky was overcast. Light from the window spilled in, pale and uneven like a gaze that couldn't meet your eyes. Lena had just finished wiping down the kitchen and was carrying a stack of clean towels down to the lower level when the hallway door opened. Not loud, but enough to make her chest still for a beat. Julian stepped in. White dress shirt, charcoal, trousers, the same attire he wore for meetings. He held a file folder in one hand, eyes still scanning the cover as he walked, until they nearly collided. The hallway was narrow. The light slanted through the window made the space between them sharper, smaller, impossible to ignore. Julian stopped first. Lena looked up. She didn't step back, didn't yield, not like all the other times she'd encountered someone above her. Julian opened his mouth. Maybe because he felt he had to. Maybe because the silence had grown unbearable. Just one word. No more followed. He looked at her, as if asking to be forgiven, or perhaps asking for something else entirely, something he hadn't found the name for yet. Lena responded softly, but each word landed like it had been carved in stone. "It's all right, I'm fine." She didn't smile. She didn't accuse. But her eyes, those eyes that no longer held hope, no longer held hurt, were the ones that gripped his heart and wrung it tight. Julian started to speak again, a reason, an apology, maybe just her name, but the words never made it past his lips. He tightened his grip on the folder in his hand. He stepped to the side, past her. No touch, no sound. But their breath was close enough to hear. Lena stood still. Only after his shadow disappeared around the corner did she turn. She looked back, just for a moment, then turned away again. The estate walls were thick, but in that brief exchange something cracked wide open in one of them, and sealed shut in the other. Julian didn't look back. Lena didn't call after him, and maybe it was that silence, the deliberate choice not to speak, not to reach, not to demand, that left the loudest echo of all. If you've ever had a moment like that, moment when your heart spoke long before any word could form, keep it close, because the story doesn't end here. Late afternoon spread a soft wash of light across the porch, slanting gently like the close of a long breath. Monaco, at the edge of summer, had lost its blinding brightness. Now it felt as if the sky was quietly closing the invisible shutters of a fading year. Lena had just finished the last batch of dishes, the scent of soap still clinging to her hands. She dried them absently, crossed the living room, meaning to make tea for her grandmother, but stopped. The wooden cabinet in the corner, still the same one. The same worn handle, smoothed and cracked with time. The place where her mother had once kept the things she never quite finished saying. Lena looked at it, not like all the times before, when it had been just part of the room, but as if the light from the window had reached out and placed a finger on it just for her. She knelt down, fingers slipping beneath the drawer's edge, touching the fine layer of dust like brushing the surface of memory. The bottom drawer, long unopened, creaked softly as it gave way, the sound like someone exhaling after years of quiet. Inside, scattered papers, worn notebooks, unopened envelopes, and a cream-colored handkerchief with a frayed corner. Lena sifted through it all with care, as if her hands were reading for a pulse in the past. And then she found it, a small, dark brown leather notebook the size of her palm, its bent corner suggesting it had once been hastily tucked into a bag. She wiped away the dust and opened it. On the first page, a slanted line of handwriting. Interior Design Scholarship, Spring Term. Below it, a date from 18 years ago. Lena's hands froze. Her mother, the one who had taught her to tell oak from walnut at 8, who once repaired a broken table leg barehanded when Lena was 12, who had once tucked a slip of paper in her pocket that said, "To live beautifully is to live without needing to win," had dreamed of designing living spaces. But Lena had never known she applied for a scholarship, never knew how close that dream had come to something real. The middle pages were filled with calculations, tuition, travel, meals, with a note scribbled in the margin. "If I get it, maybe I can take Mom with me." Lena's grip on the notebook tightened. Her eyes blurred, not from tears but from the way her heart knocked out of rhythm, louder than the present around her. At the back was a hand-drawn sketch. A simple room, but detailed. A small wooden desk, a window filled with light, shelves mounted on the wall, a blank space for hanging photos. The pencil strokes were fine, deliberate. Beside the sketch, in tiny print, "Not to be beautiful, but to be lived in. To be real." The words were plain, but they landed on a place in Lena that had gone unnamed for years. She stared at them, as if each letter was a breath her mother had left behind, still clinging to the page. The old paper still held a faint trace of rose water and the soap on. Her hands created a thin film between past and present. A memory surfaced, her mother sitting cross-legged on the floor, pen in hand, while Lena lay nearby, doodling on a pillow. Her mother had said, "A beautiful room isn't about furniture. It's about how safe you feel in it." Lena swallowed hard. From the other room, her grandmother's voice floated in, gravelly, soft as wind. "You're like your mother, stubborn and strong." Lena didn't turn right away. She pressed the notebook to her chest, leaning against the side of the bed. For the first time, she didn't feel alone in her life. Her mother had had a dream, and she had been forced to set it down. Not with bitterness, but in hope that someone, someday, would pick it up. And now that Lena held it in her hands, it no longer felt like something that frightened her. It was the only thing that made her feel awake, fully alive. She stood, placed the notebook on the table, then picked it up again. She didn't put it away. She didn't tuck it into a drawer. She laid it gently on her pillow, opened to the final page, letting the last light of day fall across the drawing. Then she whispered silently, "No need for anyone to hear. Mom, if you never got to live this dream, I'll try." And for the first time, it didn't feel like a distant thought. It felt like a decision, one already stepping toward her. The midday rain had pulled away slowly, leaving the pavement glistening like the surface of a quiet sea after a storm. Lena stood just outside Café Lumière, her fingers grazing the fogged window pane. She looked in. He was already there. Julien sat alone at the windowside table, facing the sea. Back straight, hands clasped lightly in his lap. On the table, 2 espressos, one still steaming, the other already cooling. The cafe held only a few scattered patrons, and the delicate clinks of spoon against cup tapped into Lena's chest like a soft, persistent knocking. She pushed the door open and stepped inside. Not rushed, not hesitant, but each step felt as if something was tugging gently at the back of her heels. Julien looked up at the sound of the bell. His eyes found her. Instinctively, like a reflex once so familiar, now hesitant in its reach. Lena sat across from him. She didn't smile, didn't look away. She didn't place her bag on the table, didn't remove the light scarf from her neck, as if she were just passing through, as if this wasn't a conversation, but a quiet standoff. Whoever spoke first lost. Julien broke the silence. His voice was low, steady, not trembling, but close. "I was wrong," he said. "Wrong to think I had the right to make someone a wager. Wrong to believe that silence was somehow less cruel than truth." Lena didn't respond. Her eyes lingered on the cup before her. Small, deep brown, tilted slightly as if someone had nudged it with the edge of a thought. She didn't touch it, but her gaze read it the way one might study a scar that had closed but still ached beneath the surface. "Julian," went on, "I didn't think I'd fall into the very thing I was trying to keep out, but when you walked away, I realized everything I thought I understood felt small compared to the way you left, straight-backed, without asking for anything." She tilted her head slightly. Not quite a scoff, not quite a sigh. Her lips pressed into a line. Her hand tightened just a little around the strap of her bag resting beneath the bench. "I used to think," Lena said quietly, "that silence was a way to protect myself. But I've learned it's also how people decide you're not worth fighting for. And when you said nothing that night, I understood. It wasn't because you had nothing to say. It was because I wasn't worth saying it for." Julian pulled his hands back from the table. A small gesture, but it felt like his heart had just slipped from a place he thought was solid. He nudged the coffee toward her. Gently. So gently it didn't make a sound. She looked down at it, then met his gaze. "Thank you," she said, "but I'm not thirsty." Her eyes held no anger, no chill, but something in them stopped him from reaching, like the surface of clear glass, too transparent, too honest, and in that clarity, a reflection. Sometimes it is your own hesitation that makes others step back. She rose, not abrupt, not resigned. She didn't slam any doors, but she didn't open any either. Julian stayed where he was, watching her disappear past the window, the breeze lifting. The edge of her scarf, a whisper of white fabric, weightless as a hope, quietly set down. He turned back to the cup in front of him, still faintly steaming, but surely cold by now. He didn't drink, not because the coffee was bitter, but because when the warmth inside someone fades faster than a midday espresso in summer, no apology is ever enough, or on time. Lena stepped out of Café Lumière with a pace neither hurried nor slow, but her heart ran fast, like it was trying to escape her own skin. "I'm not thirsty." It hadn't been about the coffee. It was the only way she knew how to keep herself from softening, from sinking into that late-bloomed kindness steeped in guilt, sweet and heavy. She didn't want to forgive, not yet, because forgiving too soon felt like erasing everything she'd fought so hard to survive. She didn't look back, but when her fingers brushed the inside of her pocket, she realized her hands were still cold, just as cold as they'd been when she walked in. The espresso was still on the table, and in some quiet part of her, its heat lingered, neither warm enough to comfort nor cold enough to forget. A silent apology that wouldn't let go. Dusk came quickly. The light thinned across the sky like a wet silk scarf slipping off the shoulders of the city. Her phone vibrated just as she reached the bus stop, a call from the hospital. One word, stroke, tightened, around her chest like a fist. She didn't hear the rest. She'd already hailed a taxi, left her coat behind, clutching the phone until the screen dimmed in her palm. Hospitals always smelled like something specific. Old linens, oxygen, and fear pressed into quiet corners. Lena sat outside the emergency room, hands like ice, not from the air conditioning, but from the terror of not being ready to lose the last person she had left. When the doctor came out and said, "She's stable," but we need to monitor her closely." Lena didn't cry. She just exhaled, long and deep, like a wordless prayer sent into nowhere. But in that moment, she knew. She was spent. The hospital room was small. Her grandmother lay still on the white bed, head tilted toward the window. Her hand curled softly as if holding something between two fingers. But there was nothing there. Lena sat beside her in the plastic chair, one hand cupping her own forehead, the other wrapped around that fragile hand. She thought of her mother, wondered if, had she lived, she would have sat like this too. Footsteps, soft and careful. A young nurse entered, blonde hair, glasses fogged slightly, a paper bag and receipts in hand. "Miss Lena." Lena looked up. "The bill has already been covered. A man came in before you arrived. He only asked one question." The nurse glanced down at the note, smiled gently. "What kind of books does she like?" Lena didn't answer. In her mind, something opened. Not empty, but spacious. The kind of space where something quiet might settle. She stood, walked into the hallway. The lights above glowed in a muted yellow, soft against the white tile. Outside the glass doors, the rain still misted the evening air. On the bench near the ER entrance, she saw it, a slim book wrapped in brown paper. A House for One. She'd mentioned it once. Offhand, while rinsing dishes. When she hadn't known anyone was really listening. Lena returned to the room, sat back down. Her hand rested on her grandmother's, no longer trembling, still cold. She looked into her grandmother's eyes. They were clouded now, but brighter than the doubt Lena had carried for years. "He came," her grandmother said, not a question. Lena nodded. "Have you forgiven him?" "No," Lena answered. "But I'm starting to believe someone is trying to learn how to love without leaving new bruises." Her grandmother closed her eyes. A small smile touched her lips. Her hand remained in Lena's, and for the first time in many long days, Lena felt something unexpected. Not relief, not peace, but held. She glanced at the book on the table, something like the espresso left untouched, not drunk, but warm enough to heat one quiet corner of her heart. After hours at her grandmother's bedside, Lena felt her body sinking with exhaustion, but her mind refused to rest. The soft beeping of the heart monitor and the frail rhythm of her grandmother's breath blended into a sorrowful lullaby that echoed through the quiet halls of her chest. The hospital's dim lights cast a pale sheen over her grandmother's face, highlighting the deep creases time had etched and the quiet history of a life lived through hardship. Outside, the rain had finally ceased. Morning sunlight slipped through the sheer curtains of their small apartment, drawing faded lines of gold across the worn wooden floor. Lena sat on the ground, back against the sofa, cradling a book she'd read through the night in the hospital. Her eyes burned with fatigue, but her heart felt lighter than it had in days. Beside her sat an old, sun-bleached cloth bag, her mother's, the only thing left after her final hospital stay. Lena had never dared go through it properly, but today, after a long night in that white-walled room, with her grandmother sleeping soundly and Julian having vanished like a half-formed echo, she no longer felt afraid of what had been kept inside. She opened the bag. Inside, aged papers, notebooks with peeling corners and one smudged floor plan. An interior layout, simple but warm. At the bottom, written in her mother's familiar tilt, "Not to be beautiful, just enough to live, to breathe." to return to. That was her mother's dream. That was all she'd ever wanted. As Lena laid the sketch aside, her eyes caught on an envelope tucked between the old journals. Cream-colored, the edges soft and creased, as if it had been held many times. On the front, just 2 words. Lena Rivera. Her fingers trembled, not from fear, but from something she hadn't dared feel in a long time. Hope. She opened the letter. Inside, an invitation to interview for a scholarship, offered by the Rivera Creative Foundation. The handwriting was elegant, graceful, words whispering directly to the recipient's chest. For the women who build dreams with bare hands. Lena read it again. And again. Then folded it carefully, pressing it to her heart. For the first time, in so long, her heart beat fast, not because she was afraid, but because she felt alive. Her grandmother lay quietly in the bed nearby, her weathered face touched by a soft band of morning light. Lena moved to her side, gently taking her hand. That hand, once held her mother through war, held Lena through loss. Now, it waited for Lena to carry an old dream forward in her own way. "You'll go?" her grandmother asked, eyes still closed, her grip tightening ever so slightly. Lena didn't answer. She stepped to the window. Outside, the sky stretched, a brilliant blue. Gulls coasted lazily over the sea. The waves glittered with sunlight like they'd been dipped in gold. She opened the window wide, let the wind rush in, filling the room. For the first time, she didn't shut it for fear of cold, didn't shade her face from the sun. She stood there, letting the light hit her face, her chest, her heart. For the first time, Lena didn't see that dream as something to protect and store away, but as something she had the right to step into. Maybe you too have been carrying someone's dream, or your own, for a very long time. If one day that dream found its way back to you, would you be brave enough to walk into it? If yes, drop a to let Lena know you're opening the door beside her. Lena folded the scholarship letter and laid it on the table, her fingers lingering at the edge as though weighing something no one else could see. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. But wherever her gaze landed, the air seemed to still. She knew she couldn't respond to the letter just yet. Not because she doubted the opportunity, but because deep down, a wound hadn't closed. To go or not to go. It wasn't only about the future, it was about how to leave the past, and the past, sometimes, still carried other people's eyes pressed between your shoulder blades. No one invited her to Julian's charity gala, but no one had told her not to come. The white envelope left at the estate's front desk bore no name, just a line embossed in silver ink. For those who build dignity with quiet hands. Lena didn't need to ask who it was meant for. She sat for a long time in the old kitchen, the invitation resting in her palm like a smooth stone. Light enough to carry, but too heavy to ignore. Then she stood, took out the cream dress still hanging in her wardrobe. It was old, but she pressed every crease with care, not to impress anyone, but so that when she looked in the mirror she could believe, I came for me. The rooftop ballroom of the Seaside Hotel glowed in white, hydrangeas blooming across every table, pristine, linens draped like silk over each edge. The room sparkled beneath clusters of crystal lights scattered like summer snow. Everything seemed curated to resist even the smallest flaw. Lena entered, quiet as smoke. No heads turned, and that wasn't what she noticed. What she noticed was that her heart didn't clench. She picked up a glass of lemon water from the buffet. Her eyes passed over silk gowns, red-soled shoes, the unmistakable scent of luxury. Everything gleamed. Everything told her she didn't belong. A young waiter passed, slowed when he saw her. His look was curious but not unkind. "Excuse me, were you the one who used to mop the floors on the King Star yacht?" Lena didn't flinch. She nodded, eyes steady. That answer, that simple nod, was its own period. It needed no footnote. The waiter moved on, but two women nearby had heard. They didn't laugh, didn't whisper. One adjusted a slipping dress strap. The other lifted her glass, glanced over, then looked away, just long enough for Lena to feel the silent flick of recognition in their minds. Ah, it's her. Lena didn't stay. She walked slowly into the long, gray-tiled hallway where the ballroom light didn't reach. Her low heels tapped softly on the stone. A tall mirror ran along the wall, catching her reflection from behind. She stopped, not to admire, not to assess, but because she felt something, a wrinkle, low on the back of her dress, small but visible against the cream fabric. She didn't bend, didn't reach to smooth it. Because for the first time, she understood. The wrinkle didn't ruin her. It was part of her, like the sketch's stray pencil mark that somehow makes it real. Unrepeatable. She turned, didn't look back. The lemon water. Still untouched, she set it down on a table by the door and walked out, leaving nothing behind but the brief imprint of her presence. But that brevity, like the pause between two movements in a symphony, left the whole room sounding just a little less sure of itself. After the charity gala, Lena didn't go straight home. She made her way to the hospital, where her grandmother was still recovering from the mild stroke. The hour was late and the corridors were nearly silent, filled only with the occasional shuffle of footsteps or the soft swish of a mop somewhere in the distance. Lena walked slowly, carrying a bag of books and fresh sleepwear. The ceiling lights cast a dim, steady glow, her shadow flickering faintly along the tiled floor. The last room at the end of the hall was half open as always, its soft light spilling out like a quiet breath. Her grandmother lay turned to one side, eyes closed, her breathing calm, one hand resting open as if waiting for someone to hold it. Lena sat down beside her, placed the bag gently on the floor, and remained still. She didn't want to wake her, but her grandmother's voice came first, faint but certain. "How was the gala?" Lena smiled softly, lowering her head. "Like every other gala, except this time, I didn't feel like I had to shine to matter." Her grandmother gave a slow nod, eyes still shut, like that truth meant more than any story Lena could tell. After a quiet moment, Lena reached into her bag and pulled out a small voice recorder. "Do you remember this?" she asked. "Your mother's old recorder?" Her grandmother opened her eyes and something gentle flickered through the fog of age. "Yes, I found it in the old box. There's a recording, one I never finished listening to." Lena pressed play. A faint hiss, a pause. Then a woman's voice, young, bright, but lined with something tender and unfinished. It floated through the quiet like light brushing over glass. "I want to build a house with windows that face the sun. It doesn't need to be big, just somewhere I can breathe. The sound was patchy, the words not sharp, but they pierced straight through time, into skin, into bone. Her grandmother stared up at the ceiling, said nothing. Lena placed a hand over her abdomen as if to hold the voice in place. "I didn't know she had that dream," Lena whispered. "She did," her grandmother murmured, "but it wasn't grand. Your mother didn't need much, just a roof, a window, a little light, and you." Her voice cracked, rough from having carried someone else's dream too long. Lena bowed her head, lips pressed together. She didn't cry, but her vision blurred. "That was her voice," her grandmother said again, "when she was your age." And suddenly, Lena didn't feel her mother as a memory anymore. She felt her as someone walking beside her, someone who had once asked the same questions. Does a house need permission to be built? The tape continued to play, fragmented sentences, the rustle of sketch paper, a half-song humming beneath it all. Lena didn't close her eyes. She stared up at the ceiling, where the soft green light of the heart monitor reflected against the wall, forming a glowing square of color, a window made of nothing but light. She whispered, "Grandma, if I apply for that scholarship, I'll build the house, but not just for her, for me." Her grandmother didn't answer right away. She simply reached out, took Lena's finger, squeezed it once, then let go, as if saying yes. As if saying, "Go, but I won't hold you back." Lena looked down at her hand. It wasn't shaking anymore, it wasn't warm, but it carried just enough weight, like for the first time she was holding something real. A future. Not dazzling, but real. Outside, the sky had not yet turned, but through the hospital window, she saw it. A faint line of orange across the horizon, like the first pencil mark on the sketch of a house facing the sun. After the quiet hospital night, where her mother's dreams became wordless messages pressed into her hands, Lena woke with a weightlessness that felt unfamiliar. She wasn't unafraid because the pain had disappeared, but because it had finally been named. And once pain has a name, you begin to see the path through it. Her grandmother slept soundly, her breath steady, like a lullaby without words. Lena kissed her forehead and left the hospital before dawn, carrying a silence deep enough to reach the bottom of her soul. Morning light slid gently through the wide windows of the Kingsley estate, spilling across the back garden where hydrangeas bloomed in gentle clusters. The air still held the scent of fresh-cut grass, but something had shifted. The wind didn't feel the same. Maybe because Lena had finally learned to breathe without borrowing space. She came without appointment. Not to reclaim anything. Not to prove anything. Just to close a chapter. Clean and quiet. Julian was in the garden, watering the flowers. White shirt, soft linen trousers, sleeves rolled to his elbows. His arms were sun-touched, his back bent slightly as he adjusted the nozzle. Broad shoulders, but they no longer made Lena feel small. What stood between them now wasn't distance. It was the thin glass pane of something unnamed, no longer growing. She stepped forward, her pace unhurried. The crunch of gravel beneath her shoes made Julian look up, and in his eyes, something like hope, that quiet kind that dares not speak. But before Lena could say anything, another voice interrupted, cutting through the moment like a thread snapped mid-seam. "Julian, did you see where they placed the new lavender pots?" Mrs. Kingsley emerged from the left corridor. She was exactly as Lena remembered her. Tall, silver hair in a perfect twist, charcoal cardigan draped lightly over her shoulders. She stopped when she saw Lena. Her gaze swept over her. Not hostile, not warm, just categorizing. "You've been well, Lena?" she asked with a smile that was neither cruel nor kind, just measured. "Thank you." "I've been fine," Lena replied softly. A small nod. Then she turned to Julian as though Lena were a footnote no longer relevant to the story. "You should. Be careful about maintaining clear lines with former staff," she said, her voice calm but every word honed like a scalpel. "Not everyone invited to a party should start thinking of themselves as regular guests. Misunderstandings are easy, and you don't need misunderstandings like that." Her tone was gentle, but her meaning cut cleanly. Julian didn't move. His hand still gripped the hose, but the water veered off, splashing unevenly onto the stone path. A wet trail spread at their feet, cold and unthinking. Lena didn't look at Mrs. Kingsley, she only looked at Julian. Her gaze was calm, but inside it, a pause, a space in which he might choose not to defend her, not to speak on her behalf, but simply to show where he stood. Julian opened his mouth, but no words came. His eyes dropped to the ground. His grip on the hose tightened, the stream of water hissing against the tiles. He may have been wrestling with something inside, but to Lena the silence said everything. She nodded, just once. Not bitter, not disappointed, just final. Then she turned, walked away with quiet dignity. Her steps fell on wet stone, leaving no sharp echo, just the soft, blurred sound of a dream dissolving. "Lena," Julian called, but that was all, like a song cut off before the first chord could settle. She didn't stop. Not out of anger, but because she had learned someone who cannot stand beside you when it's hard is not someone to hand your heart to when it's easy. When she was gone, Julian finally turned toward his mother, but she said nothing, only smiled, then disappeared back into the house, leaving him alone among the hydrangeas that couldn't lift their heads. The hose still ran, unattended, like the thing he didn't say, still spilling out, soft, constant, impossible to ignore. After the quiet morning in the back garden of the estate, Lena didn't go straight home. She wandered through the narrow streets along the Monaco coast, letting her feet decide where to go, as if, by not thinking, everything might quietly rearrange itself into a new kind of order. The sea was calm, the sky a soft gray. A light mist fell, collecting in cool drops along her forehead and neck. Not cold, not quite warm, just a gentle dampness that reminded her of things without names. By the time she returned to the hospital, night had fallen. She carried only a small bag, inside it her mother's old sketchbook, the one she brought with her whenever she lost her way. Her grandmother was lying on her side, head resting on a stack of thin towels, eyes half-lidded, fluttering somewhere between sleep and wakefulness. The TV hummed softly from the corner, showing a segment on the charity gala that had taken place earlier that afternoon. A glimpse, barely a second, flashed across the screen. A crowd of well-dressed guests, among them Julian's familiar profile. And then, behind him, almost out of frame, a woman in a cream dress, quiet and still. Her grandmother's voice broke the silence. "That girl. She looks like you, Lena." Lena paused mid-folding a towel. She looked up, and there she was, just for a breath. The version of herself from that night. Small among glittering silhouettes, present but not centered, as if her presence had been stitched into the background with invisible thread. "You went there?" her grandmother asked, her voice gentle, never pressing. Lena nodded, and said nothing more. "What happened, my girl?" the old woman asked, again, still in that steady voice Lena had always found to be the safest sound in the world. Lena sat down beside the bed. Outside, the rain had started. Fine. Rhythmic. It tapped softly against the window like a conversation meant only for those who had run out of words. She was quiet for a long time, then finally spoke, not looking at her grandmother, but at the blur of lights bending through the rain. "I'm not angry at them," she said. "I'm angry at myself." Her grandmother said nothing, only closed her eyes, as if listening, with every part of her being. Because I really believed, if I worked hard enough, stayed in my place, spoke carefully, walked the right way, then maybe one day I'd be allowed in, as if I could earn my way into something I was never meant to belong to. Each word dropped slow, each one heavier than the last. She didn't want comfort. She just needed it out after holding it for so long. I thought being good would be enough, but it never is. It never was. Her voice cracked, barely more than a breath now. Then silence. Her grandmother turned toward her. Though her eyes were cloudy with age, there was still warmth in them, a heat that hadn't faded. "What is normal, Lena?" she whispered. "If everyone had to fit the same mold to be seen, we'd stop being human. We're meant to be different. That's what makes life alive." Lena smiled, just slightly, crooked and fragile, like something small had cracked open inside, letting in a sliver of light. "I don't want to try anymore," she said quietly. "For the first time, I want to stop trying to shape myself into places that were never built for me. It's not giving up," she added. "It's letting go of the bargain I never agreed to in the first place." Her grandmother didn't respond. She didn't need to. She just reached out and held Lena's hand. Slowly. Fully. Not to encourage. Not to convince. But to say, "You have always been enough." Outside, the rain kept falling, but Lena wasn't cold anymore, because, for the first time, she was sitting beside someone who didn't need her to prove anything just to be seen. The phrase she'd carried for so long, "just be good enough," was finally set down. Gently, like a burden she no longer needed. And she stepped out from under it with hands finally free to hold herself. That morning, the sky was a soft, heavy gray. Clouds drifted overhead like slow-moving thoughts, mirroring the weight Lena carried inside her chest. She stepped out of the metro station, feet dragging with the quiet burden of everything unspoken. In her hands was her mother's worn sketchbook, faded pages, edges curled by time, and a brittle copy of the house design they'd both once dreamed of. No flawless portfolio, no curated resume, only pieces of memory, of lineage, of heart. The walk toward the glass building where the scholarship interview would be held felt longer than it should have. Each step on the cold pavement pressed her a little deeper into the past. Julian's silence still echoed like a sharp edge, lodged quietly in her sense of worth. His mother's words. The way he didn't speak. When the building finally rose before her, sleek and bright against the dim sky, Lena paused. She looked up. The tall windows reflected nothing but clouds. "Windows should face the light," her mother once said. The phrase returned like a whispered blessing. Lena inhaled. Deep. The cold air stretched into her lungs like a reset. She tightened her grip on the sketchbook, then stepped forward. The glass door was cool beneath her fingers. Her reflection met her gaze, eyes fierce, shadowed with quiet pain. She didn't look away. Inside, the hallway stretched out, calm and clean, lit gently by light filtering through narrow side windows. The hush was almost holy, her footsteps on the polished floor the only sound, a steady reminder that she was here. At the end of the corridor, a door stood ajar. Light spilled through the crack. Lena stopped, clutched the book to her chest. Thought of her mother. Those long nights bent over the table, soft lamplight on her face, sketches in her lap. The house she imagined, one filled with light, where peace could live. Lena opened the book. The pages were yellowed, but the drawings were intact. On the final page, her mother had written in looping script, "A house with light-facing windows, a place where the heart can stay warm." The words trembled in Lena's hands. Her throat burned, but no tears. Not now. This was not a moment for fragility. This was a moment for standing. She stepped into the interview room. 3 people sat behind a long table. They looked up as she entered, expressionless but attentive. She walked to the center, set the sketchbook on the table, and opened it to the house design. "This was drawn by my mother," she began, her voice steady, measured. She spent her life chasing a dream of a house filled with light, a place where people could breathe, could rest. "I'm here today not just to carry on that dream, but to build something that is mine." One of the panelists, an older woman with silver hair and a calm, intelligent gaze, leaned forward slightly. "Do you have your personal file?" Lena shook her head. "I believe this design, and the story it carries, says more about me than any document ever could." Silence followed, the kind that often makes people afraid, but Lena wasn't afraid. She had learned, sometimes silence is not absence, it is listening. The woman nodded, slow and deliberate. "Thank you for sharing. We'll be in touch." Lena bowed her head gently, closed the book, and left the room. As the door clicked shut behind her, she felt something lift. Not certainty, not pride, but relief. Because no matter the outcome, she had done what she came to do. Outside, the sky had shifted. Clouds parted faintly, pale blue bled through, and the light, though soft, found her face. Lena closed her eyes, let it warm her skin. She wasn't waiting to be seen anymore. She had chosen to stand, under her own light, and maybe you've been there too. Standing before a door you weren't sure would open, but the moment you stopped waiting for permission and chose to walk in anyway, that's when the miracle began. If this story touched something in you, follow this journey. Because somewhere, someday, you too might find yourself standing before your own light-facing window. The afternoon in the library passed like a breath held too long. Slow, suspended, quiet. Lena had just rinsed her hands at the small garden sink, the scent of rosemary and metal lingering faintly in the air. Her mind was still caught in the echoes of a dream from the night before. Her mother, the house with sunlit windows, and that look she'd never quite been able to name. Not approval, not praise, just the kind of seeing that lets someone exist, fully. Sunlight poured slantwise across the garden, sifting through bronze-tipped maple leaves. Everything around her was so ordinary it felt unreal. But inside her, nothing was still. Something, or someone, was coming. She felt it in the quiet shift of the air, the strange tightness in her breath. Julian stood at the end of the gravel path leading from the library to the garden. He didn't speak right away, didn't smile. They stood just far enough apart to see. Clearly, eyes, breath, what hadn't been said. "I know I shouldn't be here," he said, his voice low, hoarse at the edges like an old scar. "But I think, if I don't say this now, you'll never know." Lena didn't respond. Her hand rested on a pot of pale green rosemary. In her other hand, the watering can dripped softly, little drops striking the soil with a steady, unhurried rhythm. Julian stepped closer. He held a thick envelope, carefully wrapped. He extended it to her. "It's an invitation, the launch of a new scholarship fund, the Lena M. Foundation. I founded it. But you're the reason it exists. I want you to be there. Not for thanks, just to witness what your dream helped build." Lena looked at the invitation but didn't take it. Not yet. She watched his face. Really watched it, and for the first time, it held no pride, no performative ache. Just a man who had been wrong and who was trying to name it without demanding redemption. "I used to want that," she said quietly, her voice clear and calm like cool water from a stone. "You're to stand beside you at events like that. Not to be seen, but to exist there, in your world, without having to ask." Julian stayed silent. He knew this was not a moment for interruption. "But I learned," she continued, "even if I managed to enter that world, I'd still be someone standing just at the edge, the girl with a wrinkle at the back of her dress that no one pointed out. The one who was forgiven, maybe, but never really asked to stay." A breeze caught her hair and lifted it gently, light catching in each strand. In that moment, Julian saw her as he had long ago, before everything, and yet not the same. This wasn't a reunion, it was a recognition and an ending. "Lena," he said, not to hold on, but like a farewell. Soft, slow, true. She bowed her head slightly, finally, took the invitation, but her gaze offered nothing. No promise, no resentment, no spark of celebration. "I'm not sure I'll come," she said. "Not every place I've inspired is a place I need to show up just to prove I'm worthy of it." Julian pressed his lips together and nodded. "I understand. But if you don't come, I'll still say your name first in the speech." And then, at last, Lena smiled. A small, real smile. Not performative, not bright, just a curve of quiet light, like sunlight filtering through bare winter branches. "Thank you," she said, for not trying to explain it this time. Julian stepped back, leaving her alone. No lingering, no reach. It had all been said, and sometimes clarity is the softest parting two people can give each other after walking too long with too much unsaid. Lena turned back to the rosemary, tipped the watering can. It was almost empty. But her chest no longer felt dry. Somewhere above the garden, birds called to one another, soft, echoing in the waning light. There are pains that once cut deeply but now only hum quietly at the edge of memory, like this late afternoon, fading gently, without drama or spectacle, but still reminding the heart, you've changed, and you are still here. After the final conversation with Julian in the library garden, Lena didn't go home right away. She wandered down the narrow street near the harbor, stopping at an old bookshop, one she used to visit with her mother, where they'd bought her first notebook on interior design. Inside, dust covered the tall shelves like a soft hush. Lena sat quietly for a long time, not opening a single page. Outside, the light dimmed into evening. In her pocket, she still carried the invitation Julian had handed her. Thick paper embossed with the name of the Scholarship Foundation, and in the corner, the faint outline of a logo. It was a symbol she'd once sketched by hand, years ago, on a blueprint her mother left behind. By the time she returned home, night had fallen completely. A warm, amber glow spilled across the walls of her modest room. Her grandmother, already asleep, her breath steady beneath the thin blanket, rising and falling like the memory of a lullaby. Lena didn't wake her. She walked softly to the window, the place she always stood when her heart held something it didn't yet know how to say. She sat down on the ledge. Her hand trembled slightly as she reached for her phone. No new messages, no missed calls. But Julian's name still hovered at the top of her recent calls list. A trace of old repetition, familiar and faintly worn. She stared at the screen. Then, slowly, tapped, call. The phone rang. Once, twice. Each ring scraped gently against the inside of her chest. Not painful, but sharp enough to feel. She thought of that moment in the library garden. Him holding the invitation, sunlight catching, the edges of her hair, his voice low. "I still owe you a public apology." She hadn't answered. She'd just smiled, stepped back. She wasn't sure if she had forgiven him then, but she was certain. She no longer needed his apology to move forward. The phone rang a third time. Still no answer. She didn't hang up. Immediately, she just watched the words connecting. Blink on the screen, as if a part of her was waiting for herself to change her mind, to say something other than, "I am already enough." But she hung up, not disappointed, not hurt, just sure that she wasn't there anymore. Lena placed the phone on the windowsill and looked up. The moon was a slim crescent, sharp as a blade carving into the night sky. Stars blinked faintly in the distance, memories soft and blurred by time. Breeze drifted through the cracked window, lifting the curtain in a slow, graceful motion, like life shifting forward even as something inside her quietly let go of what once felt immovable. She whispered, so softly it almost didn't reach her own ears. "I used to think, if I was patient enough, gentle enough, willing enough to step back, you'd see me. But I forgot. Not everyone learns how to notice someone who stands still out of love." A single tear slipped down her cheek. Not from grief, but from lightness. She reached forward and closed the window. The wind stilled, the curtain fell, and the night folded itself back into silence. She didn't delete his name, but she would never call again. Because sometimes what we need most is not an answer, but silence long enough to understand. We have stepped out of the dream without anyone needing to wake us. Lena stepped into the new day not with regret, but with a quiet steadiness. The silence of the unanswered call from the night before had left no echo in her chest, only a kind of stillness that felt like truth. That morning, she rose early, brewed tea for her grandmother, carefully folded the soft wool scarf and placed it at the head of the bed. Her grandmother was still asleep, breathing in the slow, rhythmic way Lena had come to think of as life's gentlest music. And in that small sound, Lena knew she was strong enough now to go anywhere, so long as she chose to go. She wore a pale, gray dress, no makeup, no designer anything. In her hands, she carried her mother's old notebook, the one with worn leather corners and pages yellowed at the edges. She slipped the invitation Julian had given her between the pages, like a quiet bookmark. She didn't go to be seen. She went to show herself. To herself. The hotel ballroom shimmered in the late summer light. High ceilings reflected the soft thrum of footsteps and voices. Guests moved like silk through the space, men in tailored suits, women in muted gowns, champagne glasses held just so. Everywhere. Words, opportunity, inspiration, community. Lena entered through the side door, chose the last seat along the far wall. No one noticed. She preferred it that way. Her eyes found the stage. Julian speaking to sponsors. His expression composed, but his gaze holding the soft weight of anticipation. He hadn't seen her. The MC stepped up. A woman's voice floated through the room, crisp and clear. Today, we inaugurate the Rivera Foundation, a space to nurture design dreams for young talents, especially those without financial means. This began with a girl. Lena shifted slightly. A girl who chose to stay in the background, yet lit the way forward. She asked not to be named, but it is her quiet that moved us to speak on her behalf. The silent force behind the dream. The room hushed, a single pair of hands clapped, then more, a ripple of soft applause, not loud, but deep. Julian looked up. His eyes scanned the rows, quickly, carefully. He paused now and then. When he searched the final row, there was nothing, just a pocket of shadow where light hadn't quite reached. The camera swept the room. In one passing frame, brief, barely caught, a woman in gray, hair tied low, notebook held against her chest. No one knew it was Lena, but Lena saw everything. And she smiled. Not a triumphant smile. Not a satisfied one. But a gentle curve. Of someone who had finally understood. Sometimes the holiest thing is not being called forward, but knowing. You no longer need to be beside her. A little girl sitting with her mother glanced over and noticed the drawings in Lena's book. A window, a white bed, sunlight spilling in. "Did you draw that?" the girl whispered. Lena looked down, nodded. "It's beautiful. I want a window like that." Lena touched the spine of the notebook. She didn't answer, but her heart softened. Warm. In a world where everyone rushed to be seen, she had chosen stillness. Not out of fear, but because she was finally brave enough to be fully present, without fanfare. When Julian looked one last time toward the back, the seat was empty. But he smiled. Not with longing, with peace. Because sometimes the most precious thing isn't being seen, but knowing, without question, they were there. Even if only once, like morning light touching a window then slipping quietly away. That late afternoon, after the ceremony, Lena took the nearly empty bus home. Sunlight streamed through the window, warming her cheek. Not harsh, just steady, like the way her mother used to rest a hand on her forehead during soft childhood fevers. She didn't feel empty. She didn't feel elated. She just felt full. Full of something that had no name, no brilliance, no ache, no hunger to see someone again. Just a quietness, like the first breeze off the winter sea. Salted, steady, and kind. At home, she pushed open the gate gently, as if not to wake the air itself. The little house sat beneath the slanting light like an old friend, familiar with, her pace. Inside, her grandmother still slept, her breathing even in the half-open room. Lena poured herself a glass of water, made a pot of jasmine tea, and sat on the front steps of the porch. The tea no longer steamed, but she didn't mind. The old radio hummed into the breeze, a familiar jazz melody threading its way through the garden. Autumn leaves. The first time she'd heard it again since that night. Rice, boiled egg, sharp words, and the quiet of her grandmother's gaze. That evening, she had sat there but wasn't really in her body. Now, she was fully here. Her fingers turned the handle of the porcelain cup slowly. She didn't drink. She didn't reach for a book to feel purposeful. Didn't take out a pen to feel driven. Didn't glance at the clock to remember time was passing. She just sat, a stray cat. One she had chased from the kitchen weeks ago, slipped into the yard. It licked at the rain pooled in a dish she'd forgotten. It didn't look at her. It wasn't afraid. It moved as if the place belonged to it, and she was simply a guest it had chosen to allow. Lena didn't shoo it away. She didn't smile. But her eyes softened. From inside, a faint sound, her grandmother shifting. Then stillness again, folding into sleep. Lena didn't rise to check, not out of carelessness, but because she trusted now. Her grandmother was all right, and for the first time, so was she. The tea had cooled, but her heart had not. The sky was clear, untouched by dust or noise. There was no notebook in her hand, no invitation tucked into a pocket, no sorrow waiting to be named. Only sunlight, drawing its quiet path across her legs, touching her bare toes against the smooth stone of the step. Lena exhaled, slow, steady. If someone had asked, "What do you want now?" she might not have answered, not because she didn't know, but because she had learned. You don't always need to want in order to live. Sometimes all you need is to sit, uncalled, unjudged, unmeasured, just tea, cooled, and a heart light. After the quiet morning spent on the porch with cooling tea, Lena returned to a rhythm of life no longer burdened by old bindings. She rearranged the bookshelf, tucked away faded blueprints and hand-drawn floor plans into a wooden box, slid it neatly beneath her grandmother's bed. A few letters of thanks from young design students, written to the Rivera Light Scholarship, lay undisturbed in a folder. She didn't reopen them. She didn't need to. The feeling of being seen no longer haunted her sleep. As the afternoon softened, Lena wheeled her old bicycle through the gate. Her grandmother was still napping, breath steady behind the open window. She left no note, only a folded blanket, already warmed and placed gently at her grandmother's feet. That was a kind of goodbye only those who've lived long together would understand. The road down toward the bay was gold with late light. Leaves, yellow and crisp, fell slowly into the path of her tires, whispering as they caught in the spokes. Lena rode without urgency, without destination. Her legs moved by instinct, but her eyes knew. Ahead, the Kingsley estate appeared, not the grand beacon it once was during gilded summer nights. Now, scaffolding surrounded its frame. The cold stone gate stood shut like a final note in a song that had played too long. Green mesh netting rippled in the wind, like the hem of a dress, belonging to a past that no longer waved hello, nor reached to hold on. Lena stopped. The wheels spun once, then stilled. She stood there, unseen, unwitnessed. No one watched her. No one waved. No one said her name. Only one woman, quietly dressed in a knee-length cotton dress, with a worn leather strap slung over one shoulder and a sun hat tilted just enough to shadow her eyes. She touched the strap once, like smoothing the edge of a memory, then let it go. She didn't glance up at the house, didn't search for windows. She'd once polished each morning, didn't count the steps she used to climb in old shoes. She simply bowed her head, pressed her foot to the pedal, and rode. Not fast, not slow, just forward. Each turn of the wheel left a memory behind. Not erased, but forgiven. The last light of day fell long and low, casting her shadow across the pavement. Not the shadow of someone who once lived in the margins, but of someone now moving forward, clear, upright, unburdened. Lena didn't look back. Because some places don't require farewells, and some stories don't end with the absence of love, but with the absence of the need to prove it anymore. The wind lifted her hair. A strand crossed her forehead. She didn't brush it away. Her gaze stayed, straight. Her lips were still, not joyful, not aching, just at peace. The road ahead was long, but this time, she wasn't running from anything. She was moving, finally, toward herself. And maybe that was enough. Thank you for walking with Lena all the way to this last step. If her story stirred something in you, leave a like, share this chapter, or subscribe to stay close on future journeys, where feeling always matters more than perfection. We don't tell flawless stories. We tell them honestly,